Okay everybody, this is of course Nick back on the Get Me Off Grid video blog, talking today about my little toy here. This is a Peltier cooler which I've been using to experiment with the Seebeck effect, which is when you apply heats to one side and cold to another to get some current coming out of the wires. This is not what I would consider to be a successful experiment. Obviously within science, every single experiment that you do is never considered to be a failure because it's always an opportunity to learn. But I've approached this particular device with a particular goal in mind, and that is to generate power for off-grid for basically nearly anybody. So essentially the theme of this one particular video blog is about the low-end user, for the people who are struggling to pay their bills or people who want to be off-grid basically at a budget. I don't think this device cuts the mustard at all. Now, I sent through a message to the sellers of this device that came in from the USA, and they've replied back about the technical specifications of this one particular device. It says here 180 degrees Celsius is the maximum exposure temperature. So the first thing you've got to do is to make sure you're not putting too much heat on the thing. Okay, now I've experimented using candles, for instance. Now I don't know precisely how much power or heat a candle can give off, but I saw on one web page there was temperatures of like over 1,000 degrees. So essentially, you know, even when you're playing around with candles, you can still have a problem. The message goes on to say that 150 degrees Celsius is the maximum continuous operating temperature. Now, if you want to generate power for a long period of time, you need to have a continuous operating temperature on the Seebeck device, on the Peltier cooler, to generate power. Okay, so you'd have to make sure you're continually giving it 150 degrees Celsius, which is like the maximum and presumably the best temperature you could have. And that will be a problem. Okay, then says size of heatsink depends upon the operating temperatures of your application and what temperature differential you hope to achieve. Remember to always use a thin layer of thermal grease between the TEG and the heatsink or heat spreader. Okay. The amount of power is dependent upon the temperature differential maintained across the two faces of the device. Well, we already know that because that's how the Seebeck effect works. If you maintain a continuous temperature differential, you'll have a continuous power output. As the temperature differential across the two faces increases, so will both the voltage and current output. Obviously. It then says, we do not test finished modules this way, so I do not have output versus temperature curves. However, for each device, depending upon the temperature differential, you can expect outputs in the range of half to 2 volts of direct currents, 0 to 1.2 amps. So you're talking about 2.4 watts maximum, and that is if you can tweak the temperatures correctly. Now, if I'm using bioethanol as the heat source, I can't guarantee I'm going to get a reliable 150 degrees Celsius. I just can't do it. Okay, I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to get the appropriate minimum temperature. But if you're doing something like an off-grid thing with technology like this, you've got to make sure you're getting the temperatures right. So I'm not going to come onto the camera and be all like evangelical and say, oh, this is the thing. I mean, like, you come onto YouTube and you'll see videos out there of people going on, you know, really enthusiastic and excited about some kind of thing that they're doing, which is of course great because everyone's got a hobby and, you know, freedom of speech and that kind of thing. But if I don't think that this thing is right for the application, I'm not going to promote it as right for the application in question. Alright? They aren't cheap. There are some cheaper models which come out of China, but they probably don't work quite as well as this one. And from the figures I've given you today, we can see that it's not necessarily the best quality of technology. Maybe as these things improve, or, you know, if you got enough money and you can get yourself like half a dozen of these things, or a dozen, and you had them all lined up against your radiator, and you had the right heat sinks, then you could try and extract money from the gas, basically your gas energy, to provide some lighting, for instance. Yeah, these things would be doable. And I'm not going to dissuade you from experimenting. But practically speaking, I don't think it quite meets the grade. I did an experiment with a candle over there, a bit of aluminium foil to separate the candle frame from the underside of the cooler, okay? And I used a pot of ice cold water from the tap on top. And yeah, I managed to get 0.7 volts coming out according to the multimeter, which was, hey, that's great. But I don't know whether that temperature maximum was necessarily right, okay, for the device. And I don't know whether, there will be a more efficient way of doing it. And on top of that, with 0.7 of a volt, could you actually even power like a jumbo LED? Alright, because like if you could power a jumbo LED, then you get more light out from than the candle itself could provide, and therefore maybe you're onto something, okay? But I think this raises too many questions. It doesn't provide enough answers, and it certainly doesn't provide me with confidence that the harvesting of heat energy in this way is right. I mean, I had a vision of having something like a house with a couple of bricks that were taken out, and inside those bricks in the wall, you could have like a couple of these things, which could then take, if you remove the panel of insulation, the warmth from inside and the cold from outside, and that temperature differential could then generate some power for you to do some of your lighting. That was a vision I had. But if you got an indoor temperature of, let's say, 18 degrees Celsius and an outdoor temperature of 0, you might be able to get like a couple of milliwatts. But those milliwatts, would they necessarily be reliable, practical, and usable to provide enough ambient light? I think this is more of an off-grid toy rather than a serious off-grid application. Okay, the technology has potential, but does it have potential for you, and does it have potential for me? These are the questions I'm asking. And it's been fun, but I don't think it's right. Thanks for listening.